The sentence hung in the stagnant air above the dinner table like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. You aren't even half the woman my 35-year-old wife is. My son Henry said it without blinking, effectively erasing 20 years of my sacrifice in a single breath. That was the moment the last thread of my maternal guilt snapped, and I decided to stop being a victim and start settling the score. Give me a thumbs up while you listen to my story. To an old woman like me, it feels like you are squeezing my hand through the screen, letting me know that my voice still means something to someone. My name is Linda Barrett. At least that is what I was called for most of my life. And now, while I tell you this, that sentence is still ringing in my head. The one my son uttered at a festive table in front of the whole family, as if he wanted to finish me off. You aren't even half the woman my 35-year-old wife is. My son, my Henry, my child whom I carried under my heart, nursed through fevers, and walked to school through the biting nor'easters and rain. He threw that sentence like a grenade in the middle of dinner, and to me, it felt like someone had hidden a landmine in the plate right in front of me. But to understand how we got to that moment, I have to take you back, far before that dinner, before his wife, before everything. I have to take you back to a time when I still believed that my children would love me for the rest of their lives, the way I loved them. I am a woman from a small town on the coast of Maine, from a stone house that smelled of salt air, fish, and laundry detergent. In that house, I raised 2 children, my son Henry and my daughter Nicole. Their father, my late husband Steve, left us too soon, and I was left alone with 2 frightened little ones and a mortgage on the house. I didn't cry in front of them. I cried at night in the kitchen while peeling potatoes for the next day and counting dollar bills in the drawer. I did everything I could. I cleaned other people's houses, cooked for elderly neighbors, and in the summer, I prepped rentals for tourists just so my kids could have books, sneakers, and never have to feel shame when the class went on a field trip. I never bought myself a real winter jacket. My old coat was good enough, just so they could be warm and never hear that sentence, "We can't afford it." It's funny how a mother's memory works, isn't it? We edit out the backaches and the cracked hands, leaving only the highlight reel of our children's smiles, desperate to believe it was all worth it. When they grew up, I was proud. Henry went to Boston to study economics, and Nicole went to Providence to college to become a speech therapist. I remember the day I saw them off at the bus station. I shoved sandwiches into one of their hands and a little cross on a chain into the other. In my heart, I gave them everything I had. I thought, now they will have it better than me. I have done my part. For the first few years, there were still calls. Short, rushed, but calls nonetheless. "Mom, I can't talk long, I have an exam." "Mom, I'm late for work." "Mom, I'll call you later." And later often wouldn't come for weeks. Or ever. I told myself, they are young, life carries them away, don't be a burden. I started sending packages, first for Christmas, homemade cookies, preserves, a little money, wool socks that I would knit myself while watching the news in the evening. I sent them for Easter, for birthdays, for the day they graduated, even though they didn't invite me to the ceremonies. I would hear from my neighbor Angie, whose niece lived in Boston, that Henry had graduated, that Nicole got a job at some private practice. I would sit down that day, write a card, and send a package by bus. The phone rang in my house, but mostly in one direction, me calling them. I would hold the receiver in my hand for hours, listening to it ring, then switch to voicemail. Sometimes I would hear only the cold voice of the operator. "The subscriber is currently unavailable." Sometimes, not even that, just silence. I told myself, they are busy, they have lives. A mother must understand. Years passed. Not 1, not 2, more than 20 years passed. 20 winters where my plates stood ready for someone's children and grandchildren who never came. 20 summers where I would bake a cake every weekend, just in case they stopped by. And then, at the end of Sunday, I would carry that cake to the neighbor because it had dried out and I couldn't eat a whole tray alone. My children deliberately forgot me for a full 20 years. I can say that now without sugarcoating it. I know it by the way they stopped answering. First messages without emotion, then messages without greetings, then finally, nothing. They blocked me on social media even though I barely knew how to use that damn cell phone. I found out about the birth of my first grandson through the neighbor's radio because the announcer mentioned a birthday greeting Nicole had sent to her husband. The last name was ours. To me, nobody said anything. I sent gifts anyway, for Christmas, for birthdays, for christenings I wasn't even officially informed about. I sent small envelopes of cash, hand-knitted hats, baby booties. Not a single thank you ever arrived. Not one call saying, "Mom, it arrived, thanks." Not a single photograph in the mailbox. Nothing. It was as if I had died, only nobody had buried me. One day, the mailman brought back a package I had sent for my granddaughter's birthday, whose name I didn't even know. Stamped on the box was, "Recipient unknown, moved." I held that box in my hands. On it was written in my clumsy handwriting, "For my little princess." And I felt something break in my chest. But this time, it was different. Not like before when the heart would break and glue itself back together on hope. This was a shatter beyond repair. There is a specific kind of silence that fills a house when hope leaves it. It's louder than screaming. It tells you that you are no longer waiting for a guest, but for an ending. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, took out my old notebook, and started writing. Not to the kids, no. To them, no more. I started writing a list of things I would do to finally put an end to the agony in which I begged for the love of my own children. I was tired, not physically, but to the bottom of my soul. First, I went to the town hall and asked how to change my full name. The clerk looked at me suspiciously at first, as if I were running from a loan shark or the police. But I was running from memories. I told her I wanted to start over. Papers, signatures, fees. I did it all. A few weeks later, officially, I was no longer Linda Barrett. In my hands, I held a new ID card with a different last name, with a new signature. Then I sold the house. The old stone house where the children's laughter that had long since quieted still echoed. A married couple from Boston came. They said they were looking for peace for their retirement. I showed them the yard, the fig tree, the view of the ocean. They didn't know I was selling them all my unreturned hugs, too. I signed the contract at the lawyer's office, took the money, and wiped my tears with my sleeve when no one was looking. I canceled the landline. I kept the cell phone for a little while longer to finish the paperwork, and then I turned that off, too, took out the SIM card, snapped it in half, and threw it into the ocean. I opened an account at a different bank. I rented a small apartment in another city, in Portland, under my new name. I vanished without a trace. At least, that's what I thought. When I first locked the door of that little apartment, I sat on a chair in the middle of the empty room and listened to the silence. There was no phone ringing, no neighbors asking when the son and daughter would come. I was alone, but for the first time in many years, that solitude wasn't a plea directed at someone. It was my decision. I told myself, for my children, I have been dead for a long time. It is time I died on paper, too. But to finally be born for myself. I didn't know my life would turn upside down after just 6 months. 6 months later, just when I thought the world had forgotten me, someone knocked on my new door, carrying with them the old last name, old wounds, and a sentence that would change my view of my own children forever. 6 months after I disappeared from my old life, someone knocked on the door of my new apartment. It was early afternoon. I was making vegetable soup and trying to get used to the silence that no longer hurt, but felt like an old coat, a little worn, but yours. The knock was decisive, not hesitant like when a neighbor brings a plate or asks for salt. I put down the wooden spoon, wiped my hands on a cloth, and felt my heart tighten. I was still that woman who fears every sudden sound because she thinks it brings bad news. "Coming, just a moment," I said louder than necessary, more to myself than to the one on the other side. I unlocked and cracked the door open, leaving the chain on. In the hallway stood a man in plain clothes, with that police seriousness that is visible even without a uniform. In his hand, he held a file. Behind him was a young woman with a bag full of papers. Mrs. He looked at the paper. Mary Newman? I needed a moment to remember that was me now, my new name, my new skin. Yes, I answered slowly and opened the door a little wider. It's me. The young man briefly met my eyes. They were the eyes of people accustomed to all sorts of stories, but mine was just another one among many to them. We are from the police and Adult Protective Services, he said in a calm voice. Can we come in for a moment? I let them in. The apartment was modest. 1 table, 2 chairs, a pull-out couch, a small kitchen counter. Nothing on the walls. I hadn't gathered the courage to hang memories yet. When you hang them, it's like saying, this is really home now. I wasn't sure yet if I had the right to a new home. They sat at the table. I sat on the edge of a chair, like a student about to be told by the teacher that she made a mistake. You don't need to worry. It's nothing terrible, said the young woman from the agency, smiling uncertainly. We just need to clarify some things. The police officer took a paper out of the file and cleared his throat. We have a missing person report for the name Linda Barrett, born such and such date, residing at the address. He paused and looked at me over the paper. Documents show that you, Mrs. Newman, changed your name a few months ago. The Social Security number was the same. I felt blood pounding in my temples. I didn't do anything illegal. I signed everything according to the law. But when someone reads your old name aloud, it's like they tear all your carefully accumulated courage in half. Yes, I said quietly. I was Linda Barrett. Now I am Mary Newman. The young woman shrugged and looked at the officer as if she expected that answer. Your children reported you as a missing person, he continued. They stated that you aren't answering calls, that you sold the house, and that they haven't been able to find you for a long time. They are worried. Worried. Something inside me laughed sourly. If they weren't sitting in front of me, I might have laughed out loud. Worried. After all those years where my number was saved in their phones, only to be bypassed like spam emails. Did they tell you exactly when they last heard from me? I asked, surprising even myself with my own voice. It was steadier than I felt it in my chest. The officer looked at the paper again. They stated that it has been a few months since you contacted them. A few months. 20 years of me tugging at their sleeves, and to them, it seems like only a few months passed. How I hadn't contacted them. My heart trembled, but now from rage, not sadness. Ma'am, the young social worker interjected in a gentle voice, your children thought something happened to you. They said you started reacting strangely, that you became withdrawn. To me, it was funny and sad at the same time. Withdrawn. Me, who hung on the telephone line for 20 years, waiting for one call from them. I am fine, I said shortly. I changed my name, sold the house, and moved. That is my right. Of course it is, she added quickly. It's just, they would like to see you. They said they wanted to talk. That they had no idea you took all that so seriously. She paused, looking for a word. All that. I repeated it inside myself. All that. My sleepless nights, my packages returned with the stamp recipient unknown, my birthdays that I congratulated myself on. All that. Is there a reason you don't want them to know where you are? The officer asked, this time in a human tone. I looked at my hands. One vein stood out, thin, blue, as if it also wanted to say something. For 20 years they had no reason to ask where I was, I answered calmly. Now, suddenly, they do. The young woman went silent for a moment, then sighed. Honestly, ma'am, they also stated that there is a question of real estate, an old grandfather's apartment in Boston, which is still under your name. They need you to sign some papers to resolve that. And there it was, the truth, naked and dry. They didn't come for me. They came for the paperwork, for square footage, door handles, and property deeds. I felt a coldness spread through my body. but not the kind that breaks you. Rather, the kind that sobers you up, like washing your face with ice water after a long cry. I understand, I said. They are worried about the apartment. And about you, she added quickly. They said they would like for you to come to dinner, to see each other after so much time, and along the way, she paused again, talk about everything. Dinner. A dinner I didn't cook. A dinner I wasn't invited to for a full 20 years, and now suddenly, an invitation that smells like legal documents. Will you allow them to contact you? The officer asked. This is no longer a police matter. We just need to close the missing person report, but it would be good for them to know you are alive. For them, I have been dead for a long time, I thought, but I didn't say it. Instead, I took a breath and felt something like defiance waking up inside me. Give me their number, I said finally. I will call them when I am ready. The young man and woman exchanged glances. It was visible that they were relieved. They left me a paper with numbers, spoke those official sentences, and left. When I closed the door, I leaned my back against it and stood like that for a long time, listening to my own breathing and the receding footsteps on the staircase. On the table remained a white sheet of paper with 2 numbers, Henry, Nicole. I looked at them like foreign names, as if they were someone else's children. I didn't call them that day, nor the next. I folded the paper and put it in the bottom drawer, among old warranties and instructions for appliances I no longer have. But every evening, while I turned off the light, I felt that drawer calling me, as if whispering, "Open me." I didn't know that ordinary piece of paper would be the ticket to a dinner where my son would utter words that would forever sober me up from the illusion that I was still his mother. The paper with the numbers sat in the drawer like a thorn you can't pull out, but you constantly feel. I tried to live normally in my new life. I would get up early, go to the market, drink coffee in the same cafe by the window, and pretend I was an ordinary woman with ordinary worries. But I wasn't ordinary. I was a mother who renounced her own children after they renounced her. Only there was no audience, no understanding, and no applause for my act. One evening, when the rain beat against the window as if someone were throwing gravel, I opened that damned drawer. Between the instructions for the toaster and an old warranty for a TV I no longer own lay the neatly folded paper with 2 numbers. At first, I just held it in my hand, feeling my palm tremble slightly. 100 questions rang in my head. What if the daughter-in-law answers? What if they tell me not to disturb their lives? What if I hear the voices of my grandchildren and they don't know who I am? In the end, I took my cell phone, sat on the edge of the bed, and dialed the number that was first on the paper. Henry, my son. The ringing lasted shorter than I expected. On the other end, a male voice was heard, a little deeper than I remember, but recognizable. Hello? I swallowed a lump in my throat. Henry. There was a short silence, the thick kind, when you know someone on both sides is searching for words. Mom, he uttered, but not with that scared, boyish voice, but more like he was verifying some information. Yes, I said, it's me. Another silence. I think in those few seconds I went through our entire past. His first step, the scraped knee, the first A in math, the day he left for Boston. Well, where are you? He uttered finally, with mild anger mixed with relief. Do you know that we reported you missing? That we called the police, hospitals? I felt that "where are you" cut me. For so many years I wondered where you were, but no one ever sent the police to look for me then. I am fine, I said calmly. I changed my name, moved. I needed a little peace. A little peace? He almost laughed, but with that nervous laughter. Mom, that's not how things are done. We didn't force you to disappear. I felt blood rushing to my face. You didn't call me for 20 years, Henry, I answered, speaking aloud for the first time what I usually whispered to the tiles in the kitchen. You didn't ask me if I was alive, if I had eaten, if I was alone for Christmas. Was I missing back then, too? Silence again. I heard a female voice in the background, muffled, decisive. Then his voice again. You can't calculate it like that, Mom. I had work, kids, loans, Life goes on. Yes, his went on. Mine stood in the same place, in a kitchen, with one plate. "Okay," I said, feeling that if I continued, I would start crying. "The police told me you wanted to see me." "Yes, of course," he sighed with relief, as if this was finally a topic he could control. "We were all scared. Nicole, me, the kids." "There is something else," he hesitated. "We could resolve everything when you come to dinner, so we can finally gather as a family." As a family. I hadn't heard that word from him in decades. "At your place?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "Come to Boston. We'll make dinner. Nicole will be there with her family, too. And my wife, of course. You know I got married again?" I knew from passing gossip and from a photograph that ended up on the internet by accident, which the neighbor's granddaughter showed me before I changed my name. I saw a young woman, firm, dressed up, with a smile for a commercial. I didn't have the courage back then to ask what her name was. "I know you have a new wife," I said quietly. "I am glad if you are happy." "I am," he answered quickly, almost too quickly. "And she is really looking forward to meeting you. You know, I told her everything about you." I wondered, what everything? Did he tell her about the packages that returned? About the unanswered calls? About all my just to hear how you are messages? Or did he recount a version in which he is the tired son, pressured by a mother who dramatizes? We agreed on a date. He calculated everything. Saturday, afternoon, so the kids can come, so it suits Nicole, so his wife finishes her shift. I just said, "Okay." When I hung up, I sat on the bed with the cell phone in my hand for a long time. The apartment was the same, but the air was different. It was as if someone had opened a window into the past and let a cold draft through all the years of silence. Reopening a wound doesn't mean it will heal better this time. Sometimes you just bleed on fresh sheets. A few days later, Nicole called me too. I guess her brother passed on that I was found. Her voice was faster, softer, wrapped in phrases. "Mom, where have you been? We were going crazy with worry," she spoke, almost breathless. I knew she was lying. Not because I had proof, but because a mother's heart knows when someone worried and when someone is just presenting themselves that way now. But I didn't expose her. I didn't have the strength. "I'm fine, Nick," I said, using the nickname I hadn't spoken in years. "See you in a couple of weeks." "Can't wait," she sighed. "And the kids, too. Imagine, they've never seen you, and you are their grandmother. We have to make up for everything." Make up for. Another big word that children easily pronounce when they are already adults. As if 20 missed years can be shoved into a few dinners and a couple of selfies. I put the phone on the table and went to the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was tired, but in my eyes, for the first time in a long time, I saw something other than emptiness. I saw determination. If I am going to that dinner, I won't go as a beggar for love, praying for crumbs of attention. I will go as a woman who knows her worth, even if her own children have forgotten her. Even if there, at that table, they try once again to rewrite history and turn me into the culprit for everything. This time, I won't be silent. I didn't know then the exact words my son would throw in my face, praising his young wife. But somewhere deep inside, I already felt that dinner would be the dividing line. The day I would finally stop being a mother who justifies herself and become a woman who presents the bill. The days until that Saturday dragged on slowly, but to me, it seemed that each one lasted longer than those 20 years of silence. On the calendar in the kitchen, I circled the date, and every time I walked past it, my gaze would stop on that red marker, like on a wound that was still bleeding. Preparations for the trip were funny, yet as serious as preparing for surgery. I opened the closet and realized I had nothing decent for such an occasion. For years, I had no one to dress up for. For the market and a walk along the waterfront, a skirt, a blouse, and a jacket were enough. And now suddenly, dinner in Boston, as if I were a lady from some movie. Still, I went to a small clothing store on the neighboring street. The saleswoman, a girl with hair tied in a high ponytail, brought me several blouses. Everything was somehow too colorful, too young for me. In the end, I chose a dark blue dress, simple, a little tighter at the waist. When I put it on in the dressing room, In the mirror, I saw a woman I barely knew. Her shoulders were hunched, but in her eyes there was something hard, like the coast after a storm. "It suits you nicely," said the saleswoman. "Do you have an important event?" "I'm going to dinner with my children," I answered, and it sounded like I was talking about strangers. I also bought a small scarf with a discreet pattern, not for them, but for myself, as if I wanted to tell my new persona, "You deserve to look decent, even when you go before those who forgot you." I thought about gifts for the grandchildren, too. Instinct told me to buy something: chocolate, a book, a toy. The maternal reflex doesn't die easily. But then I remembered all those packages that were returned, all those gifts that never reached small hands unopened. I went to the stationery store, stood in front of the shelf with children's things, and finally turned away empty-handed. If my grandchildren ever love me, it will have to be without me buying them. Saturday morning dawned cloudy. In Portland, where I live now, the waterfront was wet from the night rain, and the seagulls were screaming as if arguing with the whole world. I sat on the bus to Boston, a small bag in my lap. The ride lasted hours, but I barely noticed it. I looked through the window and saw only fragments: a tunnel, a gas station, a river, a field. In my head, the question spun: why am I going? The answer was simple and painful. I wanted to see who they had become, not just because of the apartment, not because of the papers. I wanted to confirm once and for all the suspicion that had been eating away at me for years. Are they really people who can so easily forget a mother, or did I make a terrible mistake somewhere? When I arrived at South Station in Boston, the city greeted me with the noise of cars and cold air. I texted Henry as we agreed. Soon a short reply arrived with the address and the message: "See you at 7." Without a heart emoji, without "can't wait," just information. The apartment was in a newer building, in one of those neighborhoods where all the balconies are the same, yet each has its own story. I arrived earlier, around 6:30, but I didn't want to ring the bell before it was time. I walked around the building, looked at the seesaw on the playground, the swings, the bench. I could imagine my grandchildren running on that sand while I sat on the side and clapped for them. Only they never called me. At 7 exactly, I pressed the buzzer. I heard a dog barking from a neighboring apartment and a child's voice: "I'll get it," and then a female voice: "Slow down, let Dad." The door opened. In front of me stood Henry. He was taller than I remembered, a little wider at the waist, with a few gray hairs at his temples. In his eyes, I searched for that boy who once ran after me on the beach. Those eyes were now cautious, almost measuring. "Mom," he said, and kissed me on the cheek. The kiss was quick, formal, like when you meet distant relatives at a funeral. "Henry," I uttered, and felt my throat tighten. In the living room, I saw 2 children peeking from behind the couch: a girl, maybe finishing elementary school, and a younger boy. I smiled at them, but they just pulled their heads back, confused. Of course, to them, I was a complete stranger. Then she appeared, his wife. She was tall, groomed, in a tight dress that followed her line, hair perfectly blown out, nails neat, face with discreet makeup. Her eyes weren't bad, but there was something assessing in them, as if she were scanning me from head to toe. "Good evening," she said, extending her hand. "I am Tiffany." I squeezed her hand. "Nice to meet you," I answered. I paused for a moment. "Linda, but officially now, Mary." For a moment, I saw a flash of curiosity appear in her eyes. "Yes, Henry told me about that." She smiled coldly. "It's convenient to have a choice of who you will be, isn't it?" I didn't answer. Her words weren't openly malicious, but underneath the tone something was felt like, "You are the problem and we are the victims." We sat at the table. It had everything: roast meat, potatoes, salad, cakes. It smelled warm, like home. For a moment, I felt a stab of jealousy. Not towards her as a woman, but towards the fact that she was the one with whom Henry built family memories, while I stood on the other side of a screen that never rang. "Grandma, do you want juice?" asked the girl, encouraged by her dad's nodding. The word grandma, from her mouth, sounded new, uncertain, like when a child learns a foreign language. "I do, honey, thank you," I smiled. "What is your name?" "Laura," she said, and quickly added, "and this is my brother Peter." I mumbled that it was nice to meet them, but inside me it echoed. These are grandchildren I am seeing for the first time. So many birthdays I missed. So many first steps, first words. The dinner started with polite sentences. Tiffany talked about work, about some firm where she leads a team, about difficult clients. Nicole was late, but finally appeared with her husband and her 2 children, with a heap of excuses about traffic and crowds. Hugging, air kisses, everyone was creating noise in which I felt like a piece of furniture that had been temporarily brought out of the basement. "Well, you don't look bad at all," said Nicole, sitting down. "We thought, considering you disappeared, that you were sick or something." Disappeared. That word again. As if I were a thief who fled the scene of a crime. "I am healthy," I replied shortly. Well, you know how it is," Tiffany chimed in. "Work, kids, loans, constantly on the run. We barely managed to organize this. But it's important that we are finally all at the table, right?" She smiled a wide, practiced smile, the one people pose with for family lunch photos, and afterwards, they fight in the kitchen. I looked at them, all my adult children and their children, and felt like I had dropped into someone else's movie in the middle of the plot. Everyone had their roles, their inside jokes, their routines. For me, there was only space at the end of the table, like a footnote. I tried a few times to insert a question, some small thing. How is school? What kind of music do they listen to? But the conversation always quickly returned to them, to their problems, to their plans. I was the topic only when someone would casually throw in, "Oh, remember, Nicole, when Mom..." And then they would tell some anecdote from childhood in which I was always either funny or overly worried. While I was cutting meat on my plate, I felt the old feeling slowly gathering inside me, that I am superfluous. But this time, something new went along with it. The awareness that I was the one who tried for 20 years to be part of their lives, and they didn't pick up the receiver. I still didn't know the real reason for this dinner, the one that wasn't written in the invitation message, waited somewhere behind my daughter-in-law's sweet smile and the look that measures me. And behind it will soon come that sentence, the one that will simultaneously hurt me and set me free. After the initial commotion, plates were filled, glasses toasted, and for a moment it seemed like just an ordinary family lunch. The children spoke in school voices, a little louder than usual, to cover the discomfort of the adults. "Grandma, do you like pizza?" asked little Peter, looking at me from under his bangs. "I do, of course," I smiled. When I was younger, there was barely any pizza. I baked bread and tomatoes in the oven myself. "You see," Tiffany chimed in, "that's what I'm talking about, Peter. People before didn't have half of what we have, and they survived anyway. We today just whine." At first glance, it sounded like a compliment to past generations, but to me it seemed like a small needle pointed at me. She is strong, modest, and we are weak and dramatized. "Still," I said calmly, "not everything was bad back then either. We had less, but we were there for each other more." A short silence ensued. Nicole quickly changed the subject, started talking about work, about a colleague who gets on her nerves. Henry complimented her, threw in jokes. Everyone laughed. I watched their hands, how they move, how they pass dishes, and thought, these same hands haven't typed my number in years. Somewhere after the main course, when the kids withdrew to the room to play video games and cakes and coffee arrived at the table, I felt the atmosphere change, as if someone pulled an invisible curtain. Their eyes started lingering on me more. Sentences became more careful, more measured. "Mom," Henry started, looking into his coffee cup, "we are glad you are okay. We were really worried." "Of course," Tiffany followed up, pulling the cups closer to the center of the table. "When the police told us you changed your name and sold everything, honestly, we thought you might have had a breakdown." "No," I replied slowly. "I didn't have a breakdown. I had enough." I felt Nicole flinch. Enough of what? I raised my gaze and for the first time that evening consciously passed my eyes over each of them. Enough of calling for 20 years, sending gifts, begging for one call, for one visit. Enough of pretending it's normal that my children treat me like a commercial on TV. Just click skip. Henry rolled his eyes with that same movement he had as a teenager when he thought I was boring. "Here we go," he said half aloud. I knew it would turn out like this. "Like what?" I asked calmly, although my heart was pounding. Tiffany placed her hand on his forearm, as if calming him. "Let's just not look for culprits now, okay?" she said in a voice she uses to address clients. "What matters is that we are here now, all together. The past is the past." I felt old, suppressed rage rising in my chest. "The past is the past for you," I answered. "For me, it is 20 winters I spent alone, 20 Christmases at a single plate setting. That is not something that gets thrown in the trash like an old receipt." Nicole sighed, loudly, demonstratively. "Mom, you always dramatize everything. It was never enough for you. When we were kids, you always repeated how much you work, how much you sacrifice." "Because I did sacrifice," I interrupted her. "I didn't make that up." "But we were your children, not debtors," she said, now sharper. "And then you wonder why we stepped back a little? You didn't give us air. Everything was, I am this, I am that." That was the moment I realized how nicely they had arranged the story for themselves, that my love suffocated them, and they, poor things, had to escape. "You stepped back so much that you didn't visit me for 20 years, I said. "When your father died, you didn't come with me to light a candle. That is not stepping back a little." Henry put down his cup a little harder than necessary. The porcelain clattered. "Okay, enough," he said. "We didn't call you as much as you expected, but that doesn't mean we didn't love you. I had my own problems, loans, an ex-wife who made my life hell, work, Nicole's kids, everything. Life isn't just mother, mother, mother." "It isn't," I agreed quietly. "But a mother is someone who isn't erased with an eraser." Tiffany leaned forward a little. "Look," she said, "we all have our versions, but we came here for a specific reason too, right?" There it is. Finally, someone said it. A specific reason. Henry nodded. "Mom, remember that apartment in Boston, Grandpa's? It is still registered in your name. We would like to sort that out now, because, realistically, you don't have anything to do with it anymore. We live here, the kids are growing. It would be logical to transfer it to me and Nicole, so we have everything clean." "And to me," Tiffany chimed in casually, but loudly enough. "I mean, formally, we are a community, a family, so we don't complicate things later if something happens." The sound of her words, "if something happens," hung in the air. I was that something that could happen. My disappearance, my death, my funeral song. "So," I said slowly, "you invited me to dinner so I would sign papers." "Oh, not just for that," Nicole added quickly, but there was too much haste in her voice. "We wanted to see you, of course, but since you are already here, why not solve that too? Everyone will benefit." My heart tightened, but from the inside, like when tea in your cup suddenly goes cold. "And what do I get?" I asked. Not because I wanted a piece of the pie, but because I was interested in how they would answer. Henry laughed, this time openly, but without joy. "Mom, surely we won't count money. You have your pension. You sold your house. You say you are fine. That apartment is small and old anyway. We will fix it up, maybe rent it out, help the kids. It's for the family." "For which family?" I asked, feeling my voice quiver. "For the one you built while you were erasing me from your lives?" In that moment, Tiffany rolled her eyes and laughed with that thin laugh. "Honestly," she said, "it seems to me that you simply don't know how to let go of control. Henry and Nicole are grown people. They have their families, and you still want to have the last word. That is not maturity. Some women at your age simply accept that it is time to hand the baton to the younger ones." It stabbed me, but I wasn't ready to let that pass. "Some women at my age," I answered, "haven't eaten alone at a table for 20 years while their children sent silence instead of a greeting. Don't give me big words about maturity when you don't even know what it means to call someone for Christmas." Henry slammed his hand on the table. The kids in the room quieted the game for a moment. "Enough," he shouted. "You won't talk to my wife like that. Tiffany has been with me for the last 10 years. She went through everything with me. She is the mother of my children. She holds this house together, works, cooks, cares." He raised his chin. His voice was hard. "You know what, Mom?" he continued, looking me straight in the eyes. "You aren't even half the woman my 35-year-old wife is." The words landed on the table like stones. Nobody said anything. Only the ringing of a spoon against the wall of the cup that Nicole nervously twirled could be heard. Tiffany was silent, but a barely visible trace of satisfaction appeared at the corner of her lips. I felt something break in my chest, but this time there were no tears. It was like ice cracking. After it, the water is no longer the same. I looked at my son, who had just told me I wasn't even half a woman. The son to whom I was both father and mother, seamstress, cook, cleaner, confessor for years. The son who now raised this new wife of his onto a pedestal and shoved me into a ditch. In that moment, somewhere deep inside me, something turned over. I realized that at this table, I was no longer a mother begging to be understood. Here, I was a witness. And witnesses sometimes do what is most terrifying for the guilty. They record the truth and withdraw. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing. After these words, nothing will remain the same, neither in their papers nor in mine. When those words left his mouth, "You aren't even half the woman my 35-year-old wife is," I had the feeling someone had opened a window in the middle of winter. The room was the same, table full of food, coffee smelling good, but I became freezing cold, not on my skin, but somewhere deep, in that part I had kept for my children all my life. Nobody said anything immediately. Nicole lowered her gaze to her plate. Her spoon tinkled quietly from nervousness. Tiffany just sat a little straighter, as if someone had finally spoken aloud a comparison in which she comes out the winner. The kids from the room shouted something about the game, unaware that a bomb had just exploded in the living room. I inhaled. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just felt something snap inside me that I had been persistently patching up with hope until then. "Nice," I said finally, in a calmer voice than I felt. "I am glad you have such a high opinion of your wife, Henry. That must be nice for her to hear." He looked at me, as if he didn't expect a calm answer. Maybe he counted on a scene, tears, a theatrical exit. "But," I continued, "if I am worth so little in your eyes, then I really don't see why you would be interested in what is in my name, neither the apartment nor anything else." "Oh, don't turn it around now," he waved his hand. "I just told the truth. Tiffany works, keeps the house, fights with everything. You were," he paused, searching for a word, "you were always a little dramatic." "Dramatic," I repeated slowly. "That's what it's called when a mother calls and sends packages for 20 years and then one day gets tired." Nicole chimed in, as always when she gets uncomfortable. "Can we stop turning those years back and forth?" "Those were different times. We all had our problems. You had your problems," I said. "I had an empty house and a phone that never rang." Tiffany sighed, leaned forward, and rested her elbows on the table. "Mrs. Barrett, Mary, whatever. Nobody disputes that you tried. But it isn't fair that you sit here now and pretend like you are the only victim. You aren't the only mother in the world who worked hard. Some women know how to let go, accept that children have grown up, that they have their lives, their wives," she looked at Henry and smiled, "who are there by their side every day." I felt that every day cut me. I was there every day while he was small, but that doesn't count anymore. I looked at them in turn, son, daughter, daughter-in-law. "You know what?" I said, pushing the plate a little away from me. "I wouldn't want to talk about that anymore tonight. Thank you for dinner. You are full. You have drunk enough of my past for tonight." I slowly started gathering my things. Scarf, bag, coat over the back of the chair. "Where are you going now?" asked Henry with half a mouth. "We just started talking. We haven't even mentioned the papers properly." Exactly why I am going, I answered. I am not signing anything tonight, not after this. Don't play the insulted one now, mumbled Nicole. Always the same. As soon as it's not your way, you raise the anchor. I turned towards her. I raised the anchor every time I defended you in front of people. When I said you were good, just busy. Now I am raising it for myself. Tiffany snorted mockingly. This is unbelievable. We give her a family dinner, and she behaves as if we brought her to court. If this isn't a court to you, Tiffany, I said, then I don't know what is. You, as a lawyer, or whatever you are, should know what it looks like when someone is reduced to the defendant's bench. I didn't wait for an answer. I went towards the hallway. I heard chairs squeaking. Someone whispered something. While I was putting on my coat, 2 smaller pairs of feet appeared behind me, Laura and Peter. Laura looked at me uncertainly. Grandma? Are you going already? It's me, Grandma. The second time that evening was softer than the first, as if it just hit her who I was. I leaned towards her. I have to, honey, I said. The bus leaves early. Thank you for the juice. You're welcome, she mumbled and looked aside. It was visible she was uncomfortable about something. Maybe she also felt the weight of her father's words, that you aren't half the woman. Children understand a lot, even when we think they don't. Henry came to the door, semi-officially, like a host seeing off a guest. We will contact you, he said, when you cool off a little, and I hope you will think reasonably about the apartment. It is a family matter, Mom. Family, I repeated. When you remember that I have a family, you can contact me. Until then, the apartment is my business. I turned around and walked out. The hallway in the building was narrow, full of smells of other people's dinners. In the elevator, I pressed the ground floor and looked at my face in the blurred mirror. It seemed older than in the dress shop, but in the eyes, there was something new. Not sadness, not anger, pure, cold clarity. I took a taxi to the station, more out of a need to escape than comfort. The driver talked about football, about gas prices. I just nodded. When I entered the waiting room, I looked for the farthest bench, sat and stared at the tiles. There were no tears. Tears dried up when the mailman returned with that package for the unknown recipient. This now was a different phase, like when a wound no longer bleeds, but a scar remains that itches when the weather changes. I managed to catch the evening bus to Portland. I sat by the window, clutching the bag to myself as if it were the only living being that belonged to me. The night road rumbled, and in my head I repeated his sentence, like a bad song. You aren't even half the woman. So I started listing inside myself. Am I not the woman who broke through with 2 children and alone? Am I not the woman who cleaned other people's tiles by day to buy them books and patched their backpacks at night so they wouldn't see the holes? Am I not the woman who sold her wedding ring to pay for her son's freshman year because we won't have him be embarrassed in front of others? If all that isn't woman enough, then the problem is in the scale by which I am measured, not in me. Somewhere past New Hampshire, while the bus was passing through the dark, I made a decision. Not rash, not vengeful, but calm. Like when someone closes a window through which a draft has been blowing the whole time. They will not get the apartment in Boston, not because I wish them harm, but because I finally realized that my whole life I tried to buy their love. With one more A on the report card, one new toy, one more package. And love that must be bought is not love. The ocean greeted me at dawn, gray and calm. When I got off the bus, the air smelled of salt and moisture. Inside me was the same kind of ocean, restless but determined not to let anyone sail on it however they please anymore. I went up to my small apartment, took off the dress, hung it carefully. It had done its job. I ran water into the kettle and while it was heating, opened the drawer with papers. Between bills and contracts lay something I had avoided for a long time. An old classified section where I once, out of plain curiosity, circled the number of a law office that dealt with real estate and wills. My finger found that circle of ink by itself. Okay, I said, half aloud to the kitchen. Next time I sit at a table, it won't be a family lunch. It will be a lawyer's office. And at that table, finally, I will be the one setting the conditions. The ocean somewhere behind the window rustled quietly, as if agreeing. I called the number from the classifieds early in the morning, before I could change my mind. I know myself. If I waited until the afternoon, I would have already found 100 excuses why it isn't time, why I shouldn't cause drama, why children are still children. This way, still with the taste of coffee in my mouth and disheveled hair, I pressed the keys. "Law offices of Anthony Lewis, how may I help you?" A male voice answered, measured, but not cold. "Good day," I said, and swallowed a lump. "I need advice. It's about an apartment and children, and about the fact that I don't want them to think they can come only when something needs to be signed." There was a short silence on the other end, the professional kind, when a lawyer is already arranging the case in his head. "Ma'am, we can offer you an appointment this afternoon," he said. "Does 5 p.m. work?" "Yes," I agreed, before my old fear managed to speak at all. The office was in an old building near the center. High ceilings, walls full of binders. It smelled of paper, coffee, and slight dampness. At the desk sat a middle-aged man, neat beard and glasses with thin frames. On the door it said, "Attorney Anthony Lewis." "Please, come in, ma'am," he asked, pointing to a chair. I inhaled. "I called you as Mary Newman," I said quietly, "but actually, my name is Linda Barrett." He raised his eyebrows, but he didn't laugh. He didn't comment. He just wrote down both names in a notebook. "Okay," he said, "tell me everything, from the beginning, so I can understand." I didn't tell him my whole life story, but I told him the important stuff. The house I sold, 20 years of silence, disappearing from papers, the apartment in Boston that remained in my name, and the dinner where my son invited me to sign something along the way. After telling me I wasn't half the woman his wife is. When I spoke that sentence aloud, in that coldly decorated office, it sounded even uglier than at the table. Anthony put down his pen and just looked at me for a moment. "So, in summary," he said that they reported you missing because they didn't know where you were, but actually they needed your signature to dispose of the apartment. "That's how it turns out," I nodded. "Now I would like to know, am I obligated to sign anything, and can I do something with that apartment completely bypassing them?" A barely visible trace of irony appeared at the corner of his lips, but not towards me, rather towards the situation. "Ma'am," he said, "the apartment is in your name. You are the sole owner. None of your children have any right to ask you to hand it over to them. You can sell it, leave it as inheritance to whoever you want, children, grandchildren, neighbors, a charity, or no one, and let it go to the state. But you are not obligated to do anything you don't want." Those words, "you are not obligated," settled in me like warm soup after a long winter. My whole life I felt obligated to cook, to gather, to forgive, to call first, to swallow pride. Now someone finally tells me, "You are not obligated." "And can I paused, "can I make a will now, while I am alive? Clear and maybe," I searched for the right word, "and maybe have them hear it while I am still here? So I don't wait until I am gone, for them to fight then?" The lawyer leaned back in his chair. "You can. We can draft a will. We can even organize for it to be read in your presence, say at a notary or here with witnesses. That isn't exactly common, but it isn't forbidden either. However, you must count on it being emotionally demanding." I laughed, more to myself than to him. Emotionally demanding has already happened. Now I would like something to finally be emotionally just. He nodded. "Okay. And whom do you want to leave the apartment to? Children? Grandchildren?" Here I paused. The first, softest thought was the grandchildren. Bypass the children. Give to those who aren't guilty for their parents. But then I remembered, they are still under their roof, their upbringing. That apartment would again become a toy in the hands of those who already forgot me once. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "I only know one thing. I don't want Henry and Nicole to get it. Not because I wish them harm, but because I don't want the message to be once again, you can ignore me as much as you want. In the end, I will give you everything anyway." The lawyer was silent for a while, then said, "There is an option to gift the apartment. while you are alive, to someone you want to help. Or you can leave it to the grandchildren with very clear conditions. For example, that they get the right of disposal only when they reach a certain age, and that until then the apartment is rented out, and the income goes to, say, some scholarships. The word scholarships stung me with something unexpected. I remembered my son leaving for Boston for college with those sandwiches of mine in his hand, and myself secretly taking the wedding ring to the jewelry store. I remembered the kids from the neighborhood who never went further than waiting tables because there was no money. And can a fund or something similar be made, I asked slowly, so that the income from that apartment is used for scholarships for children without parents or those who have no one of their own? Anthony looked at me, now with a spark of respect in his eyes. It can, he said. It isn't easy, but it can be done. We can connect with an association or foundation. That would require a little more paperwork, but it is feasible. I felt my eyes filling with tears, but this time it wasn't that old, broken sadness. It was a calm, quiet joy that someone like me, someone who was forgotten, might get a chance. Because I finally decided I wouldn't be anyone's victim. Good, I said, wiping my eyelid quickly. Make it so. Let the apartment go to children who don't have a mother calling them every Sunday. And to my children, I paused, to my children, I will leave something else. What exactly? He asked. From my bag, I took out a thin notebook with a hardcover. In it, over the last months, I had started writing down dates. When I sent packages, when I called, when I got a rejected call. All those tiny proofs that I wasn't the one who disappeared first. This, I said, and the letter where the truth is written, not to punish them, but so that they can never again say, we didn't know. I want them one day, when they sit at some other table, maybe without me, to remember that there existed a woman they called dramatic, who just wanted them to occasionally ask if she was okay. Anthony nodded slowly. I understand. That can be arranged. We will make a will, a deed of gift for the foundation, and we will attach the letter as your personal contribution to the estate. Walking out of the office, I felt lighter than when I entered. It wasn't revenge in that movie sense. No one will end up in prison. No one will end up on the street. They will still have their apartments, salaries, their 35-year-old wives. But one small apartment in Boston won't become the crown of their ingratitude. As I walked towards the apartment, the ocean was far away, but inside me, a quiet wave hummed. I knew that when the time comes, it will hurt when they sit at some table and listen to what I did. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid they would call me selfish. If caring about one's own dignity is selfishness, then I have finally earned it. In the evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the one that now had only one permanent plate, mine. I opened the notebook and started writing the letter. Not an insult, not a curse. The truth. How I loved them, how I waited for them, how I got tired, how I heard the sentence, "You aren't even half the woman," and decided I would no longer try to be a woman by someone else's measure, but a human by my own. And somewhere between the lines, a new thought was born in me. Before that apartment goes to some unknown children, maybe I still have one duty. Not to Henry and Nicole, but to their children. Not to buy them, but to tell them at least once in their lives something their parents obviously never told them. Love is not looked for in square footage, but in calls, hugs, and visits when it isn't anyone's birthday. That thought will lead me to the next step, and it will be the beginning of my quiet but very clear revenge. I started writing the letter the same evening at the kitchen table with a small radio playing soft oldies. The pen slid across the paper uncertainly at first, as if even it wasn't sure if it had the right to say everything I had swallowed for years. On the first page I wrote, "My dear grandchildren," then crossed it out. They aren't mine, at least not in the way I imagined grandchildren. They didn't sit in my lap. I didn't take them for ice cream. I didn't show them how to make strudel. Still, blood is blood, whether I wanted it or not. I wrote again, "Laura, Peter, and you, children of my daughter whose names I barely know." Then stopped again. It was too long, clumsy. In the end, I just wrote children and let the rest of the story do its work. I wrote to them about myself, but not the way resumes act for a job, not about schools and workplaces, but about how I used to get up earlier in the morning to bake pancakes for their father and aunt, about how I warmed their hands over the stove when they came in wet from the snow. I also wrote about that package that returned once with the stamp "Recipient Unknown," and how I held it in my hands as if holding my own heart thrown out of the house. But I was careful with words. I didn't want it to be an indictment against their parents. Children aren't guilty for growing up in a story that was already told before them. I just wanted them one day, when they take that notebook in their hands, if they ever take it, to know that somewhere there exists a woman who loved them even before they were born. When I finished the first page, my hand hurt. Years of work and arthritis in my fingers reminded me that the body is no longer the one that could once clean the whole house before lunch. But the heart was, strangely, lighter. A few days after the meeting with the lawyer, Henry called me. I recognized the number immediately. "Have you thought about it?" he asked without greeting. "About the apartment?" "I have," I said calmly. "And?" There was impatience in his voice. "I decided to resolve it in my own way," I answered. "Everything will be clean, legal, and orderly, but not the way you imagined." On the other end, silence ensued. Then noise, as if he walked away from a station, moving away from others. "What does that mean?" he hissed. "It means I am no longer asking for your love, so I am leaving you the square footage," I said. "When everything is done, you will find out. You don't have to worry. You won't have problems with the police or court if that is the question." "Don't act like a saint," he snapped. "You know that apartment is Grandpa's legacy. It is logical it stays in the family." "In the family," I repeated. "When you remember what that word means, maybe we will talk again." I hung up without saying goodbye. I didn't cry. The coffee on the table had gone cold, but I was quite fine with the cold. That evening I looked at my cell phone for a long time. I knew the apartment number by heart. I knew roughly the rhythm of their day, too. When lunch roughly is, when the kids have practice, when Tiffany probably sits in the living room with a laptop in her lap, working from home. At one moment I pressed call. It rang twice. "Hello?" a female voice answered. "Tiffany's." "Good evening," I said politely. "This is Linda. Grandma." I deliberately didn't say Mom. "Uh-huh," was heard shortly. "Henry isn't home." "I don't need Henry," I interrupted her. "Can I just briefly talk to Laura?" Hesitation. A long, short inhale. I could almost hear the wheels turning in her head. Is it smart? Is it healthy? Will it disturb my control? "It's not convenient right now," she said. "She has studying." "Just a minute," I said. "I won't ask her for anything except how she is. If it's easier for you, stay on the line." Another moment of silence. "Fine." "Laura," she shouted. "Phone." I heard the footsteps. A quiet voice. "Hello?" Tears jumped to my eyes. So simple, just that one hello. "Laura, it's me," I said gently. "Grandma, the one who was at your place for dinner." "I know," she said quietly. I recognized the voice. I didn't know where to start, so I started from the simplest. "I just wanted to hear how you are," I said. "Are you okay? Are you healthy?" "I am," she answered. "It's just that evening. It was weird." She paused as if gathering courage. "Dad was angry. I didn't like how he talked. Tiffany says you misunderstand everything, but—" Silence again. I felt uncomfortable. Something trembled in my throat. Children, you see. They don't always know how to express exactly what injustice is, but they feel it in their gut. "I know, honey," I said. "It was weird for me too. But you don't have to choose a side. You are a child. I just wanted you to know that—" I paused. "That I am here, somewhere. That I exist." "Why did you disappear?" she asked suddenly. A word straight from the mouth of adults. "I didn't disappear," I answered slowly. "I just stopped running after those who turn the other way. Sometimes adults don't know any better. That isn't your fault." On the other end of the line, I heard her quiet sigh. "Will you come again?" she asked. That question hit me harder than anything. It was sincere, without calculation. I didn't want to lie. "I don't know," I said. "But if you ever find yourself in Portland, if you come with your class or to the sea," I smiled to myself, "call. I will leave the address in a letter you will receive when the time is right." It sounded almost like a fairy tale, but there were plans in it. "I have to go now," she said quickly. "Tiffany is looking at me." "Okay, honey," I whispered. "Just remember one thing. The value of a person is not measured by how many apartments they have, but how many people remember them when they have nothing." "Okay," she said, quietly. "Bye, Grandma." When the line went silent, I sat on the chair as if I had just run a marathon. It wasn't the beginning of an idyllic relationship between grandmother and granddaughter, but it was enough to know that at least one young soul in that family feels something isn't right. A few weeks later, I sat in front of Anthony, the lawyer, again. This time on the table were papers, real, official, with seals and empty spaces for my signature. "Here is the will," he explained. "Here is the deed of gift to the foundation. We connected with an organization that cares for children without adequate parental care. The apartment in Boston will be rented out, and the income will go for scholarships. The foundation will carry the name of your late husband, if you agree. The Steve and Linda Barrett Foundation." "Steve," I uttered almost with tenderness. "Let it say Steve and Linda Barrett. If we exist together somewhere, let it be on paper." "It can be done," he smiled. "And here," he showed another paper, "is the instruction that your children and legal heirs be notified about everything only after you approve it. You suggested they be invited to the reading while you are still alive. We will organize that at the notary's office." I looked at those empty lines for the signature and felt my hand tremble. Not from fear, but from the weight of the decision. "You know," I said, "at that dinner, my son said I wasn't even half the woman his wife is. Today, when I sign this, I sign as a whole woman, imperfect, but whole." Anthony didn't say anything. He just turned the papers towards me. "Take the pen, sign here, here, and here." When I pulled my signature for the last time, my old, clumsy handwriting that now stood next to Mary Newman, I felt as if I had closed a door that had remained ajar my whole life. I walked out of the office with two feelings in my heart: sadness for what could have been and never will be, and a quiet, stubbornly warm satisfaction that we, Steve and I, remained parents in at least one way. Not to our children, perhaps, but to some who are yet to come. Now only one thing remained: to decide when I would face them with it. And when I do that, I won't shout, I won't cry. I will just show them for the first time in my life that a mother also knows how to say enough, and that behind that word stands something more than empty threats. A few months passed since the day I signed papers at Anthony's. Winter quietly slipped into early spring, and I was slowly getting used to a new kind of peace, the kind where you know you decided something and you no longer have anyone to justify yourself to. Every morning the same, coffee in a small cup, window open just a little, just enough to smell the salt air, short walk to the market. The fruit seller already knew me by name, by the new one, of course. To her, I was just Mary who always looks for apples that are hard but sweet. She didn't know I used to be a woman whose son said she wasn't even half the woman his wife is. She didn't need to know. That was a burden I decided to carry only where necessary. One morning the phone rang. On the screen, a number from Boston, a law office. "Ma'am," Anthony answered, "the notary has an open slot next month. We can organize the reading of your will and contracts then. If you want your children to be present, now is the time to invite them." I felt my heart beat faster from something between stage fright and determination. "Let the notary invite them," I said, "officially. If I call, it will look like I attacked them again. Let a cold, white paper come into their mailbox this time, like it came to me for 20 years. "I understand," he answered briefly. "We will send invitations as for any probate proceeding. Neutral." Neutral. A word that sounded like luxury to me. My life with them was never neutral, always owing something, exaggerating, dramatizing. Now paper will speak instead of me. A few days later, Nicole called me. Her voice was high, tense. "Mom, what do you need this for?" she started without greeting. "I got some invitation from a notary. It says it's about a will and estate. Are you okay? Are you sick? What are you doing to us again?" Interesting, I thought. When it's something for them, then again I am doing something to them. When I sent gifts for 20 years, that was never too much. "I am fine," I said calmly. "I am not sick, at least as far as I know, and the invitation is not something I am doing to you, but something I owe you. The truth." "Can't we solve that privately?" she sighed. "At home, at the table. We don't have to include a notary. It looks like we are suing each other in court." I recalled that table, that evening, that sentence. "You aren't even half the woman." "At home," I said quietly, "it happens too often that what I say gets retold differently the next day. Here, everything will be written down, and that is good. For all of us." On the other end of the line, I heard her whispering to someone, probably her husband. "Look," she said, "it is good for all of us. She cut us out of the apartment 100%. I smiled, but without joy. Their imagination works fast when they need to guess where the interest is. "I'll come," she said finally, "but this is really unnecessary raising of dust." "If it is so unnecessary to you," I answered, "you can always not come." I knew she would. When there is even the slightest smell of inheritance in the air, people rarely stay at home. A few days later, Henry called, too. His voice was tense, but he tried to sound casual. "I got the invitation," he said. "Have we really reached the point where we solve family matters at a notary?" "You solved family matters without me for 20 years, I said. "This is the first time I am solving something without you." "Don't be mean," he sighed. "You know we love you in our own way." That phrasing, "in our own way," was like a thorn. That is the same as saying, "I love you, but not enough to pick up the phone." "Okay," I said, "if you love me in your own way, then respect that I take care of myself in my own way. Come if you want to know what I decided." The day of reading the will came faster than I thought. The spring morning in Boston was bright but chilly. I wore that same dark blue dress I wore to their dinner. The difference was in me. Then I entered it as a woman who hopes. Today, as a woman ending a chapter. In the waiting room at the notary's office, I sat first. On my knees, I held a small black bag. In it, tissues, glasses, and 2 thin notebooks, copies of my book of calls and packages, one for each child. The door opened with the sound of footsteps on the marble hallway. First entered Nicole in a neat beige jacket, with a husband who acted as if he would rather be anywhere else. Behind them, Henry in a suit. And of course, Tiffany, in high heels, with a file in her hand, as if she were also representing someone. "Good day," I said quietly. "Good," mumbled Nicole. She approached me, kissed me on the cheek, but her lips didn't even touch the skin. "You aren't exactly sick, right?" she added half-jokingly, as if this was all acting. "I still walk on my own legs," I answered. "Seems enough to me." Henry sat opposite me, crossed his arms. Tiffany settled next to him, half sitting on the chair, half on her own conviction that she holds the situation under control. "I still think this is unnecessarily dramatic," she said, "but okay, if it will be easier for you." I looked her straight in the eyes. "I am not doing this so it's easier for me. I am doing it so it's clearer. Big difference." The door opened and the notary appeared. A gray-haired man, neatly dressed, with glasses on the tip of his nose. Next to him was Anthony, my lawyer. The atmosphere suddenly changed, from family tension to official coldness. "Good day, everyone," said the notary. "Please, come into the office." We stood up and entered the room with a large table, wooden, straight, on which lay papers, stamps, and neatly stacked folders. I sat on one side, alone. Opposite me, my children and their lives in expensive jackets and watches. The notary sat at the head of the table, Anthony next to him. "I invited you," he started in a calm tone, "because Mrs. Linda Barrett, now Mary Newman, composed a will and some contracts concerning property, specifically the apartment in Boston." The lady explicitly wanted you, as her children, to be present at the reading." I felt all gazes fall on me. In them, curiosity, nervousness, a little fear, too. Surely in their heads they were already dividing square footage, imagining who would get what and when. "First we will read the will," continued the notary, taking one paper, "and then an additional letter that the lady attached, which is of a more personal nature." Tiffany leaned forward, as if she wanted to catch every word. Henry pursed his lips. Nicole paused with half-open mouth, as if preparing to jump in as soon as she didn't like something. I just laid my hands on the table. They were old, wiry, with spots from the sun and life. But for the first time in a long time, they didn't shake anymore. "So," said the notary, "the will reads," and in that moment I realized that nothing could be turned back anymore. The words that follow were my answer to that sentence about not being half a woman. This was my way to show them that a woman who was too little for them definitely knows how to be enough for someone else. The notary cleared his throat a little while searching for the right paper. He didn't rush, but didn't drag it out either. He had that routine of a man who has been doing this for years. Just another case in the row. For me, it was an earthquake. For him, Tuesday. "Will of Mrs. Linda Barrett, now Mary Newman," he started reading, "composed such and such, in the presence of witnesses, formalities, dates, SSN, address." My life fit into a couple of sentences. Then came the part everyone waits for. My movable property, personal items, memories, photographs, and jewelry of lesser value I leave at the disposal of my children, Henry and Nicole, to share among themselves if they consider the memories valuable. I saw Nicole breathe a little easier, almost imperceptibly smiled. Henry kept a poker face, but his shoulders relaxed too. In their heads it stood. "Okay, this is the intro. The main part follows." The notary continued. "Regarding the apartment in Boston, on such and such street, registered in my name, I hereby declare that I do not leave it in inheritance to my children, Henry and Nicole, nor to any member of their immediate family." Silence fell in the room like a heavy tablecloth. I heard Nicole inhale, short, sharp. Tiffany raised her head a little abruptly. Henry turned his gaze towards me for a moment, as if checking if he heard correctly. The notary paid no attention to their reactions, just read on. "The stated apartment I hereby gift to the Steve and Linda Barrett Foundation, which will be founded in cooperation with a registered humanitarian organization, with the express purpose that the income from renting that apartment be used for scholarships for children without adequate parental care and young people without adequate family support." Tiffany immediately raised her hand, as if she were at a meeting in the firm. "Excuse me, just meaning nothing goes to the kids?" she interrupted. The notary raised his gaze over his glasses. "Everything that isn't specially listed in the will goes according to legal rules of inheritance. But regarding specifically the apartment in Boston, no, it does not go to your husband nor his sister. It goes to the foundation." "But that is Grandpa's apartment," exploded Nicole. "That is family property. It can't just be swiped like that." "It can, Mrs. Anthony," the lawyer spoke up for the first time. "The lady is the sole owner. She had full legal capacity at the moment of signing. Everything is according to the law." Henry was silent for maybe 10 seconds, and then he laughed, short, without joy. "Okay, bravo," he said. "Nice revenge." I turned towards him. I had no intention of lying. "Yes," I said calmly, "this is revenge, but not the kind you think. This isn't, 'now I will punish you,' but rather, 'I will no longer punish myself by rewarding you for forgetting me.'" "Well, we didn't forget you," shouted Nicole. "Here we are. We came, didn't we?" "You came when an apartment was in play," I answered. "For 20 Christmases, you didn't find the way to me. For one notary office, you did." The notary coughed mildly, trying to return things to an official level. "Please, let's leave the discussion for later. I still have to read the addition to the will." He lifted the second page. "Along with this will, I attach a personal letter to my children and a notebook in which dates of my phone calls, messages, and sent packages in the last 20 years are recorded. I want my children to know that I didn't disappear from their lives without explanation. I disappeared only when I no longer had anyone to explain to. I felt my throat tightening, even though I dictated those sentences myself. He read slowly, clearly. Every word fell on the table like a pebble. I note that this letter is my personal act and not a legally binding document, he added. But the lady asked for it to be read and handed over in your presence. He turned to me. Ma'am, do you want me to read it, or will you? I inhaled. In one part of me smoldered the desire to simply get up, take my bag, and let the paper speak instead of me. But the other part, the one that was silent for years, wanted them to hear me once in their lives while I was still alive. I will, I said. The notary handed me several pages. Looking at my own handwriting publicly was almost more intimate than stripping naked, but I grabbed the paper firmly. My dear children, I started. My voice was slightly hoarse. I know you experienced this decision as an attack. To you, I was often drama, a burden, the one who exaggerates. But I was, above all, a mother who called you for 20 years, sent gifts, waited for you to come. In this notebook, I lifted the thin booklet, dates are written down, not to shame you, but so that one day when you maybe tell your version, you can't say, we didn't know she tried so much. I looked at them. Henry looked at the table. Nicole had pursed lips. Tiffany was drilling a gaze into my forehead, as if she wanted to punch a hole. I am writing this to you also, I continued, because I heard my son saying at the table, you aren't even half the woman my 35-year-old wife is. That hurts, Henry. Not because I think I must be better than her, but because you know how many years I was both mother and father at the same time. If all that isn't enough to be a woman in your eyes, then maybe the problem isn't in me, but in the scale by which you measure. Nicole grumbled. No need to quote everything. Anthony looked at her warningly, and I continued. The apartment I received as inheritance, I leave to those who have no one of their own, because I lived too long as if I had no one of my own either. I do not do this to humiliate you, but to finally do something that is completely in harmony with what I was my whole life, a mother to children, whether mine or others. My hands shook slightly, but I continued to the end. I wrote about packages, about doors no one knocked on, about telephone silence that became louder than any shouting. I finished with the words, I am not leaving you the apartment. I am leaving you the truth. What you will do with it is no longer my responsibility. I have done my part. I put down the paper. In the room was silence, thicker than the one in my kitchen all those years. Well, you are crazy, blurted out Nicole. Completely crazy. Foundation, kids without parents. And us? We aren't children, I guess. You are grown people, I said quietly. You stopped being children a long time ago. Children don't block their mother's number on the cell phone. Nobody blocked you, mumbled Henry, but didn't sound convincing, even to himself. Okay, maybe not technically blocked, I said, but the difference is small when you never answer anyway. Tiffany leaned forward. The lawyer in her woke up. Is there a way to contest this? I mean, I am not saying we will surely do it, just... Anthony interrupted her in a cold tone. You can always try, ma'am. But considering the documentation, witnesses, and medical certificates of the lady's capacity at the moment of signing, your chances are not great. She didn't like that he told her so directly. I saw her stiffen, insulted. I don't want to sue you, I added. I don't want wars in courts. That's why I arranged everything before I am gone. You don't have to be afraid. I am not leaving you debts or problems. I just won't reward you for absence anymore. Henry finally raised his gaze. In his eyes was no longer just rage, but also something like confusion. Maybe for the first time, he realized that I really wasn't playing by the old rules. You know the kids will find out about this one day, he said. What will they think about a grandmother who would rather leave an apartment to strangers than her own family? Depends, I answered. Will you tell them everything or only half? If you tell them the whole story, maybe they will understand. If you tell them only half, I will turn out a monster. But that is your choice. I made mine. I got up slowly. The chair squeaked quietly on the parquet. "I have something else for you," I added, reaching into the bag. I took out 2 thin notebooks. I pushed one towards Henry, the other towards Nicole. "These are copies. The original stays with the will. If you ever have the courage, read it. Maybe one day when you have time, when the kids aren't calling you, when there are no loans to return, maybe you will be able to." Nobody reached out immediately. The notebooks stood on the table like small gray mirrors. The notary started packing papers, stamps, pens. He looked back at me. "Ma'am, from your side, everything is finished. If there is a need for additional clarifications, we will contact you." I nodded, turned towards my children one more time. "You know," I said quietly, "you once told me I wasn't even half a woman. Today I showed you that even half a woman can ensure with a signature that someone else has a chance for a whole life. What you will do with your full lives, that is up to you." I didn't wait for an answer. I walked out of the office into the hallway that smelled of paper and old paint. When I stepped out onto the street, Boston greeted me with the bell of a trolley and spring wind. I didn't know what would happen when the rage subsided a little. Would they call me? Would they cut all contacts? But for the first time in my life, that uncertainty wasn't a hole inside me. It was just space. And space, when cleared enough, can be filled with something new, somewhere deep. I sensed that this wasn't the end of the story with them. There are too many undiscussed years, too many unspoken sentences. And there was something else, quiet like a whisper, the thought of my granddaughter Laura, and that children sometimes grow up different from their parents. My revenge might not be that they were left without an apartment. Maybe the real revenge will be that one day they will have to explain to their own children why a grandmother preferred to help strangers than her own family. After reading the will, I didn't return to Portland immediately. I took a room in a small B&B near the station, an old-fashioned one, with floral curtains and wooden beds that creak. I needed one night between the old and the new chapter, a night in which no one would knock on my door with questions, accusations, or apologies in gloves. That evening I sat on the bed in the dress still neatly folded over the back of the chair and watched the trolleys pass through the window. In my hand, I twirled my new ID card. On it, it said Mary Newman, but in the darkness, it whispered Linda. I was both there at the table with the notary, one who was afraid, the other who signed. The cell phone was silent for a while, and then it rang anyway. Henry's number. I answered. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked without greeting. "Is it easier for you now that you humiliated us in front of strangers?" I leaned against the headboard of the bed. "I didn't humiliate you. I just stopped pretending everything was fine." "Grandpa's apartment," he growled. "You give it to some foundation, some other people's kids, and nothing to your own. Imagine, what would Dad say to that?" "Dad was the one who on his deathbed said, 'Take care of the children, but take care of yourself too,'" I answered slowly. "For 20 years, I took care only of you. It is time I respect the second half of the sentence." I felt him clench his jaw and stay silent. "You know what?" he continued after a few moments. "You always had a need to prove you are a martyr. Now you got the perfect way. Poor me, left everything to strangers. My children ungrateful. Bravo, Mom. Nice story for the coffee shop." "I don't drink coffee in coffee shops," I said. "But even if I did, I would rather tell the truth to an unknown waiter than listen once more to your version in which you are the victims and I am the attacker." He hung up without goodbye. The screen went silent. The room was mine alone again. The next day I caught the bus to Portland. The journey was long, but this time I didn't spin the old pain in my head. I just let the images pass, fields, tunnels, pieces of sky, somewhere along the way. Between 2 tunnels, I felt that the enough I had spoken was no longer a threat, but a fact. For a few days, no one called. Not Nicole, not Henry, not Tiffany. The silence this time was different. Not the one where I type and wait, but the one where I know I have done my part. Even my small table in the kitchen looked bigger, as if a large, invisible, heavy bowl had been taken off it. One afternoon, while I was folding laundry from the line, the cell phone rang. On the screen, an unknown number from Boston. I answered cautiously. "Grandma?" A quiet female voice was heard. "It's me, Laura." I leaned the clothespin on the balcony railing. The sun hit my eyes, so I squinted. "Laura," I said softer than I intended, "I am glad you called." "I found the notebook," she said quickly, as if afraid someone would interrupt her. "The one you left for Dad and Aunt. Dad threw his in the drawer and said it was nonsense. Aunt hid hers in the closet, but I found one when no one was home, and I read it." My heart jumped. I didn't expect either of them to have the courage to open those booklets so quickly. But children, you see, often find what adults try to hide. "And?" I asked quietly. "Well," she paused, "I didn't know you called so much, that you sent gifts. Mom says you exaggerate, that those are your versions. But dates are there, numbers, everything. Doesn't look like making it up to me." I leaned my hand against the balcony wall to compose myself. "I didn't sugarcoat anything," I said. "But I didn't write everything either. Everything can't fit on paper." "Dad is very angry," she continued. "He said you embarrassed him. Tiffany keeps repeating that you are manipulative, that you made everything up to look good to the world. But," she paused, "I didn't feel comfortable when he shouted that about Tiffany, that thing about not being half a woman." I felt that old knot appear in my throat, but this time I wasn't swallowing it alone. "It wasn't comfortable for me either," I said quietly, but maybe one such sentence was needed to finally sober me up. "I don't understand why they are like that," she tried, but ran out of words. "When you left us that day, Tiffany said it's better that the kids don't have too much contact with you so you don't poison them. And to me, no, you don't look like someone who poisons." I leaned my forehead on the cold plaster of the wall. It was both hard and indescribably precious to me that one young being was trying to understand. "Laura," I said, "adults sometimes say things out of fear. I am a reminder to them of what they didn't do. It is easier to say, 'she poisons,' than to admit, 'maybe we were wrong.'" On the other end of the line, I heard her stay silent, but not with that empty silence, rather the one when someone receives information and holds it in their hands, turning it like a stone. "Will you hate me for leaving the apartment to other children?" I asked aloud, what I deeply feared. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "Honestly, it is a little weird to me, but when I read the notebook, I thought, maybe it isn't bad that someone who has no one gets a chance. I have parents, whatever kind. I have them. Some other kids have no one." I felt a window open somewhere inside me. Child logic, simple, but just. "If you ever want to know more," I said, "you can come. We don't have to talk about the apartment. We can talk about what your dad was like when he was small, and about pancakes." "I love pancakes," she said, and for the first time, I heard a small smile in her voice. "But I don't know when I could come. They are very angry. If they find out I am calling you, I don't want you to be between them and me," I interrupted her. "I don't want you to have a war at home because of me. You called me, that is enough for me, more than you know." For a few more moments we were silent, listening only to each other's breathing. "Grandma," she spoke up again. "Yes, honey?" If you write a new letter, can you write one just to me? You don't have to send it to me, just so I know it exists." This question hit me deeper than anything that day. "I will write," I said, "and I will write you everything your father will never know to say about himself, and about me, and maybe one day, when you want, you will come for it." We said goodbye. Each went to her own ocean. She into the Boston asphalt, I into the Portland salt. After that call, days returned to their rhythm, but nothing was quite the same anymore. I knew that in a Boston closet hides a notebook leafed through by a young girl. I knew that in the same house someone is furious, someone insulted, someone confused. I was, for the first time after long years, calm. Not completely, of course. I knew that healing takes time, just like rheumatism. But over it settled a layer of something I never had before, the feeling that I did something just for myself. One evening I sat on the waterfront and watched the ocean. Waves broke in shades of olive and blue, like all my years. I thought, maybe a lot of time will pass before anyone calls me without a motive. Maybe our whole relationship will be reduced to a few wills, calls, and the whisper of one child looking for her place between two truths. But what I knew for sure was simple. I will no longer beg. Not for an apartment, not for a visit, not to be enough of a woman in other people's eyes. I finally became whole for myself. And when you once accept that you are whole, then even secret revenge turns into something else. Into a quiet satisfaction that those who called you dramatic now have to deal with their own movie, without me starring as an extra. Summer came quieter than usual. There were no longer those panic preparations for the arrival of children who never came, no ironing sheets in advance, no freezing cakes just in case. My just in case was now a few plates, some fruit, and a notebook on the table. From Anthony, I occasionally received short messages or calls. Everything was flowing as it should. The foundation was established, the apartment in Boston rented, the first contract signed. One day he called me. Mary, the foundation has announced the first contest for scholarships. If you want, you can come to a small commemorative gathering. It is nothing spectacular, a couple of students, a modest reception, but it would be nice for them to see you. First, I wanted to say no. I thought there were enough public tables, public readings, enough exposure. But then I thought of all those children who never had anyone selling a ring or signing loans for them. I'll come, I said, but I don't want to give any big speeches. I am not for stages. You won't have to, he laughed. It is enough that you are there. The hall where the small ceremony was held was modest. A few rows of chairs, a table with plastic cups and juices, and an improvised poster with the name of the foundation behind it. The Steve and Linda Barrett Foundation, scholarships for children without adequate parental care. Seeing my name on that canvas was strange. Once it stood only on a house bell in a small coastal town. Now it hung on a canvas for some foundation. I never imagined myself like that. 3 young people came. One skinny young man with a big backpack, a girl with short hair, and another one, quieter, who constantly looked at the floor. Someone from the association introduced them. Young people who grew up in homes, now enrolled in colleges, need help with rent, books, transportation. I watched them and a hard lump gathered in my throat. They were already adults, not children, but in their eyes was that constant caution, fear that someone would pull the rug out from under their feet tomorrow. "Ma'am," the woman from the association approached me, "these are the first scholarship recipients from your foundation. If you want, you can just briefly introduce yourself to them." I got up, feeling my knees creak a little like old parquet. I smiled at them. "I am Linda," I said. "For some, I am now Mary, too. But for you, let it be Linda. I was a mother of 2 children. Now I am, it seems, a little yours, too." They laughed, uncertainly, but warmly. "I won't give you a lecture," I continued. "I just want you to know the money you receive didn't fall from the sky. It is one small apartment in Boston. I could have given it to my children. I didn't, because I estimated that you would make more out of it than they would. Not bigger furniture, but a bigger life." That quieter young man, who constantly looked at the floor, raised his gaze towards me for a moment. Something glistened in his eyes. "I have no one of my own," he uttered quietly. "Now, I guess, I have someone halfway." "You will have your people too," I said. "But until then, here, let this be small proof that people who don't know you can root for you." After the ceremony, I sat with them at a table. We ate sandwiches, drank juice from plastic cups. Nobody here asked me why I didn't leave the apartment to family. Nobody measured me according to whether I was woman enough. They just asked me what high school I went to, if I was ever in their homes, what the ocean is like in winter. That is a feeling I haven't had for a long time. Not victory, not triumph, but that quiet satisfaction when you know that, however little, you corrected something that wasn't fair to you your whole life. Of course, the world didn't stay quiet. At one moment, the foundation ended up in the local newspapers, too. A short news item, without a photograph, just a story about an anonymous donor who left an apartment for children without adequate care. I didn't think it would reach Boston, their neighborhood, but information travels fast today. First, Nicole called me. "Are you crazy?" she started without intro. "Now it's being written in newspapers, too? People ask me, am I that ungrateful daughter? Are you happy?" I inhaled. "I didn't mention your names," I said slowly. "Journalists concluded it themselves. If people ask you, you can say what you want. You can say I am crazy. You can say I am a saint. That is your story. Mine is done." "Yes, but—" She was breathless. "We look like monsters, as if we threw you out on the street." "You never threw me out," I answered. "You just stopped coming in. That is the difference." She hung up, with some swearing in the background. She didn't call me anymore. Henry contacted via SMS, the first time in a long time. "I know it's you." No greeting, no question, just that. I didn't answer. What to tell him? "I know you know." One morning, the bell on the door interrupted my peace. I didn't expect anyone. The mailman usually arrives earlier. The neighbor doesn't ring, but knocks. I opened the door and in the hallway saw a young girl with a backpack on her back and that same hair gathered in a ponytail I saw for the first time that evening at the table. Laura. She stood, a little sweaty from the trip, with mild nervousness in her eyes. "I came with my class to Portland," she said quickly. "We have a field trip. They sleep in that hostel by the fort. I told the teacher I have a grandmother here. She didn't ask much." I still held the handle in my hand as if I didn't believe she was real. "Come in," I said, moving aside. "Or how much time do you have?" "An hour, maybe a little more," she said. "Then I have to go back." We sat at my small table, the one that waited 20 years for some children. Now, finally, one sat there, mine, but not because it says so in documents, but because she decided to come herself. I didn't interrogate her too much. I didn't want her to feel like she was at an exam. "Are you okay?" I asked instead. "At school? At home?" She shrugged her shoulders. "School is school. At home? Tense. Dad and Tiffany argue constantly because of you. She says you are no longer allowed to tell them anything, that you will turn everything against them. He is silent, but I see it bugs him." She paused, then added, "Nicole said you took away our future." I smiled, but with sadness. "If your future is one apartment," I said, "then you have a much bigger problem than you think." We were silent for a while. She looked at my shelves with cups, books, old photographs in which she wasn't present. I looked at her, searching in her face for traces of the former boy who called, "Mom, the water is cold." "Why did you really change your name?" she asked suddenly, "and disappear?" This was a question I never got from my own children. They always started from the assumption that I did it against them. She asked, "Why?" "Because for 20 years I was someone who is easy to ignore," I said. "Linda, the one who always calls, the one who always sends. When I became Mary, I wanted to see if I could be someone who doesn't beg. And I succeeded, at least a little." She tilted her head. "Did that mean you don't love us anymore?" "No," I answered immediately. "It meant I don't love myself so little anymore." I saw her eyes filling with tears, but she swallowed them. Young people today don't like crying in front of adults. I didn't force her. "I have something for you," I said. Got up and went to the dresser. I took out the envelope I prepared that day when we spoke on the phone, the one that waited for the moment when she would come for it. On the envelope it was written only, "To Laura, when she is ready." I handed it to her. "You don't have to open it now," I said. "You can at home. You can in 10 years. Inside is a letter and one photograph of your dad when he was little, so you know that he, too, was once a child, before he became a man who counts square footage." She took the envelope carefully, as if holding something fragile. "Do you want them to know I was here?" she asked. "That is your decision," I answered. "If you will have a war at home because of it, don't. I am not a battle you have to fight." She looked me straight in the eyes. In that gaze was more determination than I saw in many adults. I don't know yet what I'll do, she said, but I know I don't want to be like them. And I'm sorry, and thank you for those scholarships. I read the article. It wasn't all the same to me. I dug my fingers into the table. So I wouldn't run and grab her in a hug she might not be ready to receive yet. If one day you read in a book the name of some girl who became a doctor or professor thanks to that foundation, I said, you can know that your family, whether they wanted to or not, helped a little, because without your forgetting, I might never have gathered the courage for that act. She smiled, with that half smile of young people fighting between cynicism and hope. Sounds crazy, she said, but in a good way. When she left, only one trace remained on the table, a wet circle from her glass of water. I wiped it with a cloth, but the feeling that she sat there couldn't be wiped away. I knew this visit wouldn't magically fix everything, that she would return to the apartment in Boston full of tension, that she might lie about where she was, that she might tell the truth and cause a storm. But one thing was certain. Now in that family, there wasn't only their version of the story. There existed someone who heard my side, too. And I felt that only one thing remained for me to do before I closed the door of the past forever. One last conversation. Not with them, but with myself. And maybe, just maybe, one last short meeting in which I won't ask for anything. Not forgiveness, not explanation, but just say, this was me. When Laura left, silence remained in the apartment, but it was no longer empty, as if a trace of her laughter remained in the air, mixed with all that she didn't say. I sat at the table, the same one where I once waited for my 2 children, and placed my palm on the wood, as if listening to it for the first time truly. Linda, I said to myself, you finally welcomed a child at this table. It wasn't how I imagined, but life rarely plays by our scripts. That evening I took out one more notebook, not the one in which I recorded calls and packages, but a completely new one with empty pages. On the first one I wrote, for me. There was no dear someone, there was no address. It was a letter I owed myself for years. I wrote about everything, about little Linda who ran barefoot through the village, about young Linda who trembled before the first bills and children's first fevers, about the woman who for 20 winters in a row put one more plate on the table, just in case. I wrote about the evening when my son told me I wasn't even half the woman his wife is, and about the moment at the notary's when I realized that for that measure of his, I no longer have to give accounts. In the end, I wrote, forgive yourself, Linda, that you apologized your whole life for loving too much. From today, I no longer apologize to you. From today, I thank you. I closed the notebook. I didn't put it in the drawer, but left it in the middle of the table. So I see it. So I remember. A few weeks later, while I was watering flowers on the window, the phone rang. On the screen, Henry again. I didn't pick up immediately. I let it ring 3, 4 times. Once I would run at the first tone. Today, I finished watering first. Only then pressed the button. Hello? His voice was different. There wasn't that hard edge, at least not so much. Mom, he said, I won't be long. Already that sentence was new. Usually, he would immediately start with accusations or objections. I'm listening, I said, sitting down. I read the notebook, he uttered after a short pause. Not the whole thing, I haven't yet, but a lot. I saw the dates, and I remember some of those days. I remember you called. I remember I saw the number and silenced the cell phone. I didn't say anything. Let his heart be silent a little, too. I don't know, he continued. I don't know what to tell you that doesn't sound like justifying, and you probably had enough of that for 2 lives. At that, I laughed quietly for the first time in that conversation. It wasn't laughter from malice, but from recognition. I have had enough, yes, I admitted, but I'm listening. It wasn't fair, he said shortly, that we let you go like that and that I told you that thing about Tiffany. I know it wasn't fair. Back then I felt attacked, like a kid, so I stabbed where it hurts most. He mentioned the sentence, but didn't repeat it, as if even he didn't want to feel its weight in his mouth one more time. "I didn't call to tell you that I expect you to return the apartment now or change your mind," he added quickly. "I know you won't. I know you. I called, I don't know even why myself. Maybe so you know that it isn't exactly that we don't care, at least me." In me, the old reflex to make it easier for him appeared. "I know, son. Everything is fine." "You didn't know." I stopped it in my throat. That sentence suffered too long in me. "Thank you for calling," I said instead. "You didn't have to, and I am not obligated to say everything is fine, because it isn't. But I can tell you I am glad that for the first time you aren't talking about loans, work, Tiffany, but about yourself." Silence on the other side was thick, but no longer hostile. "Laura was at your place," he uttered finally. "I know, she didn't tell me right away, but when I saw that envelope on her desk, I recognized your handwriting." My heart skipped a beat for a moment. "Did I cause trouble with that?" I asked. "I didn't call her. She came herself. I didn't speak against you." "I know," he said quietly. "She told me. She told me you said you don't want to be between us, that you don't want to push her into anything, and that you gave her some photograph of me when I was small." I could almost see him holding that same photograph, the one where he stands in oversized trunks on the beach with a bucket of sand. "That is still you," I said. "Just now you have a cell phone and an apartment and big words, but you are still that little one from the sand." Silence again, then an exhale. "I don't know how to fix 20 years, he said finally. "Probably I can't. I don't even ask you to tell me I can. Just, if one day I come to Portland, maybe we can have coffee, without papers, without a notary, just me and you. And maybe, if she wants, Laura too." That offer wasn't a grand reconciliation from movies. There were no tears, promises of never again, but it was sincere. "As much as one knows, one can," I said, "but on one condition." "Of course," he said immediately, probably thinking I would ask for some guilt, some statement. "That this time you come without any demand," I added. "That nothing needs to be signed, nothing transferred, nothing solved. That you come only because you want to see me and not my assets." I heard him laugh mildly, almost shyly. "Agreed," he said. "If I come, it will be only for that. I don't promise dates, I don't promise anything, but somewhere in my head I have a picture of the two of us on the waterfront. So between work and everything, maybe I make it." I didn't thank him too much. We just said goodbye briefly. When I put down the receiver, I felt my heart didn't pound wildly like before. It was no longer a question of whether he would come, but the fact that I finally realized I don't live waiting anymore. A few days later, I went to the cemetery. I lit 2 candles, one for Steve at the small plaque with his name, the other for the living dead, as I used to call my love for my children. While wax dripped down the red candle, I said to myself, "Here, Steve, I took care of them as much as I could. Then I took care of their image inside me. Now I am taking care of myself. I guess you won't mind." The wind swayed the flame a little. I took that as some sort of approval. When I walked back down toward the city, the ocean in front of me shone in the sun. At one moment I realized I was walking lighter, as if I had taken off a heavy backpack. I am the woman whose son once said she wasn't even half the woman his wife is, and maybe he will think that for the rest of his life. But I am a woman who, despite everything, raised 2 children, sent them into the world, endured their silence, and then had the courage to say, enough. If you are listening to this, and if somewhere you have a mother who is boring, who calls, who sends messages, call her. Not because she will leave you an apartment, but because tomorrow you might not get a notebook, nor a will, only silence, and silence can be heavier than any sentence. I have said my piece. To the children, the grandchildren, the court, the foundation, and even to you. The rest is on them. And on you. I put the cell phone in the drawer, poured myself a glass of water, sat at my small table, and rested my palm on the notebook that said, "For me." Through the window, the sound of the ocean and the distant laughter of some other children could be heard. For the first time in many, many years, I thought, maybe it is finally time that I don't spend the rest of my life as a mother who waits, but as a woman who lives.